hiding a hollow core? One with an advanced civilization? If anyone did not believe our moon might be hollow, it was UFO investigator and author Rob Shelsky. However, after researching the facts, the author did something he rarely does. He made a complete about-face on his views regarding the hollow earth theory. Just why did he do this? For a good reason, because the evidence to support the idea of our moon being hollow was far greater than he had ever suspected. Who is Rob Shelsky? Rob is an avid and eclectic writer of both fiction and nonfiction. Rob, with a degree in science, has written a large number of factual articles for the former Alien Skin magazine, as well as many others. With over 20 years of research and investigative efforts behind him, Rob is well qualified in the subject of UFOs. As a skeptic, he likes to kick the tires surrounding UFO phenomena and enjoys asking the hard questions others seem to avoid in search for possible, yet convincing answers to these ongoing enigmas. Hi, and welcome to Just Energy. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and today we're going to be speaking with Rob about his book, The Moon is Hollow and Aliens Rule the Sky. So please welcome Rob Shelsky. Hi, Rob, and welcome to Just Energy. How are you doing today?
Okay, Dr. Rita, thank you for having me on your show.
Well, I think the nature of your book is going to be something really interesting because there is just so much controversy around the moon. Is it hollow? Do we have bases on there? I mean, there's just so much going on. But let's start here. What first turned your attention to looking at the moon?
Well, there was a lot of stuff that slowly came to a head with it because I've been a MUFON field investigator for quite a while with UFOs. And everything I saw and everything I read seemed to point towards the moon being a problem. And then one day I was being interviewed on another radio show and someone asked me, called in and said, "Do you think the moon is hollow?" And I said, I laughed. I said, "No, of course not." And, and it's not made of Swiss cheese either. But then I started looking into it. I don't know why, I just did. And I began to realize there's a lot of problems with the moon. I mean, big ones. Of all the objects in our solar system, it's the moon that is the hardest to understand, and yet it's the closest to us.
Okay, so what's so weird about it? I mean, kind of in more of a general sense of the word.
Well, you might be better to ask what's not weird about it, because there's that much wrong with it.
Wow.
The moon is oversized. We have the largest moon in the solar system for any terrestrial planet, meaning a rocky planet. The moon is not dense enough. It's too light for its size. And its orbit is very strange. It's too circular. There's only one other object in the solar system with a more circular orbit, and I believe that's Venus. And there's quite a bit else wrong with it too, but we can get into that a little later if you like.
Well, and I've heard people suggest that the moon's hollow, but what kind of there to support that? I mean, it just seems pretty far out there to make that suggestion.
Yes, it does. And actually, I didn't come up with the idea. Two Soviet scientists in the Soviet Academy of Sciences originally came up with the idea of the spaceship moon. And I believe one was Mikhail Vasilin, and the other one was Sherbakov. And it was their idea that the moon might be hollow for a number of reasons. For one thing, none of our theories about the moon's origin seem to work. There have been 5 major theories about the moon, and all of them have problems, including the very latest ones.
The one where there was some external body that crashed into the Earth, and then that chunk became the moon?
Right, that would be the Theia Theory. Sounds like I'm lisping, I know. But supposedly a planet Mars-like in size or a little less, Theia, they call it that, crashed into the Earth early on, and they sort of blew mostly apart and then coalesced together. And the moon was formed out of the remnants of that explosion. There are problems with this theory because, number one, the material on the moon doesn't seem to have any of the Theia material in it. Moon rocks brought back from around the surface of the moon show no evidence of the planet Theia being part of the moon.
But how would we know what Theia material would be or look like?
The radioactive isotopes of the moon and any object in the solar system are highly unique. Rocks, meteors from Mars have their own signature. From the moon, they have theirs. From well, any planet, and they're all different. Even the asteroids are all different. So it would have to have had some rocks on the moon that would have had a different isotopic signature from those on Earth. We don't have any that are different from the mantle of the Earth's surface. There's a problem with that. Again, the moon's orbit's too circular, and we can't account for it. The first of the creation theories of the moon said that it was simply captured. It seems unlikely. More likely, if the moon had come hurtling towards the Earth or even near it, one or two of the objects would have been thrown out of the solar system into wildly eccentric orbits. That's not the case, as we know. Secondly, the moon shouldn't have such a circular orbit. And thirdly, it shouldn't have stopped around the Earth, but it should have kept on going because of its speed, unless the Earth had a much larger atmosphere sticking further out into space to act as a brake. Well, we have no evidence for this either. So it goes and continues to go. There just doesn't seem to be any real explanation of how the moon got here. Darwin thought it might have come from the Earth. The Pacific Basin might have been the source of the moon. Well, we know that's not true because we've tested the rock material there. Another idea was that the moon might have been a georeactor. This is the newest theory, that there was a lot of radioactive material in the Earth's crust right near the equator, and this somehow ignited like a giant nuclear explosion, and part of the Earth just blew up into space. This theory came about just in the last couple of years because of the Theia theory has its own problems.
Well, when we look at the moon material, does it have an Earth signature to it, or is it completely different from that also?
It does have an Earth signature to it, but it has some very strange anomalies as well. For instance, neptunium, which is a mildly radioactive isotope, has a half-life of about a little less than 3 years. I think it's 2.2 or 2.7, somewhere in there. But if you go by that, there should be no neptunium left on Earth after 4.5 billion years, because every 3 million years or so, you've got half of what you had before. So over 4.5 billion years, there should be none left. Well, the moon has a good deal of neptunium. Earth has none. We can't understand how that could be. The Earth has a lot of helium-3. The Earth has virtually none. In fact, there's so much helium-3 on the moon, it would be great to mine because it's the perfect fuel for fusion reactors, which is another oddity. The craters on the moon. The big ones are shallow and the small ones are deep. According to the spaceship moon theory, this would be so if there was an inner core of steel or some kind of metal. And because when a meteor would impact the moon, it would travel deep into the moon the bigger the meteor was and the faster it was going. Unfortunately, the large craters are very shallow, as if the meteors hit something solid below the surface. The shallow ones, which wouldn't go in very deep, are deep because they didn't travel that far. So again, we have a lot of problems with that as well.
That's just really interesting. And I've never heard the information presented in this way. So this is good. Well, people will put out, oh, well, it's hollow. I mean, the only thing that I've heard as supportive information to the whole notion was the concept that they sent a signal to it, they blasted a nuke at it, and they heard kind of a bell-like sound come off of it. And that's the only piece of data that I have ever heard anybody put forward to potentially support a hollow moon.
Well, actually, no one's ever nuked the moon, thank God. But you're right, they did impact the moon with a satellite to see what would happen. But what we found was that every time we did something on the moon would ring like a bell. And when I mean ring like a bell, it rang for a long time, sometimes hours in length. And noted scientists said, we can't understand this unless the moon is hollow. Because when Apollo 11 took off from the moon, they left seismometers on the moon, and these things registered the moon vibrating for well over half an hour or so. In other instances, it's rang even longer. And here's another weird thing. That vibration doesn't seem to travel through the center. It travels around it as if there was nothing in the center, which is strange as well. But we can't account for it. One scientist, a physicist, said it was as if the moon has giant shock absorbers somehow in it that's allowing it to do this. There's another problem with the moon. The moon the center of the moon, the center of gravity of the moon isn't where it should be. It's several miles away from the center, and they can't account for that either. And again, we have the problem of the density of the moon. For an object that size, made of Earth-like material, it should be denser. It should have more pull on the Earth. It doesn't. Thinking that one through, are we?
Yes, we're thinking that one through. But can a planet be hollow? I mean, like, there are people that say hollow Earth theory, and I believe that there are big caverns within the Earth and definitely hollow spots. But it sounds like what you're talking about is kind of like a giant round egg that's hanging out in our sky and not just caverns.
Well, actually, I'm of two minds about that. The two Soviet scientists felt that there was a core about 25 miles down and about 25 miles down and quite thick, like 20 or so miles thick of solid metal, maybe titanium. By the way, we have a lot of titanium on the moon too, which we don't have on Earth. And that's another strange anomaly as well. And this inner shell would act as the outer for a hollow center. I'm not sure if the moon is entirely hollow. It may have large lava tubes and caverns in there, but it would have to have very many to account for the lack of density that it has. And so, yes, it could be empty in the center, hollow, or it could be a lot of huge caverns.
But if it doesn't have as much density, why doesn't it actually end up getting pulled toward the Earth because of the gravity?
Well, actually, the reverse would be true. If the moon had more density, had more mass, the Earth and the moon would be more attracted to each other. Larger objects have more of a gravity pull than light ones. So, and the moon is actually moving away from the Earth ever so slowly. I think it's about an inch a year or so, and which means at one time it should have been much closer, although we have no evidence for that either. There should have been some kind of symptoms, characteristics of the moon having been very close to the Earth at one time. We don't have that. No evidence for that. The moon is at a very funny place in the sky. Of all the satellites in the solar system, all the moons around all the planets, only our moon is situated at such a point that it makes for a perfect total eclipse. It also has the perfect solstices and equinoxes, the same as the sun. We're the only moon that has that, and we also have, again, the largest moon of any terrestrial planet in the solar system.
And you don't think that some of that is just our interpretation of what we're seeing, or us trying to lay our beliefs over a situation as far as especially the solstices and equinox?
Well, yes, I think you can take any one piece of evidence and say, well, it's just a coincidence. But when you start putting all the pieces together and you have coincidence after coincidence, then you have to wonder if something else isn't going on here. I mean, we have the idea that the moon rings like a bell. We have titanium on the moon. We have neptunium on the moon. We have helium-3 on the moon, which we don't have on Earth. We have no evidence of Theia being part of the moon. The moon's orbit is too circular by far. Orbits are naturally slightly elliptical, and the moon's is just a little too circular for that. The moon's situated at such a point in the sky that the equinoxes, the solstices, and it's perfect for total eclipses. Now you start adding all that together, and you have to start wondering, what's going on?
Well, what about the notion, and I've heard people talk about this, that it's actually a spaceship?
Well, that's the Spaceship Theory. The two Soviet scientists who in the late 70s came up with this theory felt that the moon had been moved into orbit around Earth. And of all 5 theories that we currently have for the origin of the moon, the spaceship moon theory is the only one that answers every single problem we have with the moon. It accounts for everything. All the other theories of the moon, by all the cosmologists, all the astronomers, have major problems with them.
So you're not saying it was aliens, but it's aliens.
Yeah, I'm saying it's aliens. It wasn't us, unless we had a civilization long ago that was capable of such a thing, you know.
Seems like anywhere you look, in the natural world, in the mythic record, now you're throwing the moon on top of this pile. The easiest explanation for what's going on is it was God who made it perfect for mankind, or it was extraterrestrials. And I see those terms being pretty
Interchangeable.
interchangeable. Correct. A matter of
Yes,
semantics.
it is a matter of semantics, but there is one major difference. If it's God who did all this for us, and it would be nice to think it was, then he should have done a better job because there are some major problems with the moon. It's like he whoopsed up there a couple of times. And if it is aliens, then we have another problem. What are they doing here? Why are they here? And what are their motivations and goals?
When we look at the moon, I mean, it's not habitable or human life, but do you think that there could have been life on that planet that could exist in whatever atmosphere is there?
There's almost virtually no atmosphere on the moon. It's the nearest thing we have to a perfect vacuum without quite being a vacuum. Even the exhaust from the Apollo missions significantly added to the atmosphere of the moon because it was so close to zero to begin with. So, I mean, even if you put a little bit of emptied one oxygen tank on the moon, that gives it more of an atmosphere than it had before that one oxygen tank, so quite a bit more. But no, the moon has no atmosphere. Whoever's on the moon or has been on the moon has to have been protected underground, and again, we have that spaceship moon theory. And we also have all that transient lunar phenomena or translunar phenomena that's been going on for 6 centuries at least, and actually a lot longer, but NASA only reported on it for the last 5 centuries or so. And that is significant too because it shows whatever's happening on the moon has been happening for a very long time.
Okay, so what's been happening? What's this translunar
everything.
phenomena?
Everything.
Well, like
Ever
what?
the NASA issued its own report on this, and it's public domain. You can look it up on the internet. And basically, what they did was they had researchers compile reports of anything that was seen on the moon over the last, well, almost 5 centuries. And that's about the time when the telescope became popular, and that's why they used that period. And the thing is, they came up with an incredible amount. And these aren't just fly-by-night observers we're talking about. We're talking about mainstream astronomers. We're talking about Tycho Brahe, Copernicus, all sorts of astronomers that are lauded in astronomy as the fathers of astronomy. And they found everything on the moon you can imagine. They have seen blinking lights. They have seen flashes. They have seen streaks. They have seen tracks, they have seen trails, they have seen mists, they have seen vapors, they have seen what they thought were volcanoes. Well, there are no volcanoes, at least not active ones on the moon. In fact, most cosmologists and astronomers don't think the moon has had active volcanoes for tens of millions of years, probably. So what we are seeing on the moon is unaccounted for because it has no atmosphere. They see lightning streaks. No atmosphere, no lightning. They see flashes, they see flares, they see moving, pulsing lights across the surface of the moon. What are these things?
Into your imagination, obviously.
That Tycho Brahe's and Copernicus and Galileo's as well.
That's right. That's right. Are there any other planets that don't have an atmosphere? I mean, we know like Jupiter has the sphere, Mars has atmosphere. It seems like most of the ones that we look at, except for maybe Mercury, because it's too friggin' hot, have atmospheres.
Right, but a lot of satellites don't. And, well, I won't say a lot, but a number don't. And the moon happens to be one of them. It is a bit odd it has no atmosphere at all. It's not that small where it shouldn't have some kind of an atmosphere, but it had it all. Other moons, depending on how you want to pronounce it, whether you want to do the Greek or the modern language, Deimos and Phobos or Deimos and Phobos of Mars have no atmospheres. They're very small. They're hardly larger than asteroids. But we used to think they were asteroids caught by Mars, and now we're not so sure. We don't think they might be. In fact, Phobos might be hollow as well. It might be the other hollow moon. And isn't it strange that there might be a hollow moon orbiting the only other planet in the solar system that might have once held life?
That is interesting. Is it in a circular orbit?
No, it's in a very strange orbit. In fact, we cannot account for its orbit. The orbit is very retrograde. To many astronomers, it always looked like it speeded up and slowed down, but it's because of its strange orbit. And also, there's sort of a monolith on one end of it, and its density is too low, way too low, and so scientists wonder if it isn't hollow too.
It's So you had to mention monolith. Now I'm automatically in my mind going to 2001, a space and the monolith on there.
So am I.
Do you think that based on what they've looked at on the moon, that there ever could have been life or the precursors of life on that planet? Or does it just seem dead, 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 dead?
I think it's always been a dead world, at least on the surface. I think the lack of an atmosphere, this heavy bombardment. By the way, that's another oddity about the moon. I keep giving you these oddities. The side facing us has what they call mares on them. It's Latin for seas. And they are big, large, flat areas. Look up at the moon at night and you'll see these like dull, gray, dark areas of the moon. These are these so-called huge lava beds. Mm-hmm. Now, the odd part is on the far side of the moon, there are none. Absolutely none. It's all craters, nothing else but craters.
But that's one of the other things that's weird about the moon is that it doesn't rotate. And so when we talk about the dark side of the moon, it's dark because we can't see it because it never turns to face the Earth.
No, it doesn't. The moon does have a night and day. I mean, there's no such thing as a dark side of the moon, of course. That's Pink Floyd. But the moon night and day on both sides, and that one night and day takes a total of 1 month or 1 month. And so there's 14 days of light and dark on the moon on each side. On the dark side, we can see about 62 to 65% because the moon wobbles a little, has what they call libration. So we can, if we watch it long enough with our telescopes, we can pick up about that much of it. But there's a large area we just cannot see, except by sending rockets there and or putting satellites in orbit around it.
Recently, the Chinese sent up expeditions to map out the moon or take some high-res images of the moon. Have you seen any of the data that's come out of that research?
There wasn't a lot. The rover they put on the moon stopped functioning not long after they put it there, and most of the data, what data we were allowed to see that was made public by the Chinese, was pretty much run-of-the-mill, but then it hadn't landed on the far side of the moon. So, of course, we're going to get the same data that our own Apollo got for us as well.
And see, I thought they mapped out from space. I didn't realize. I mean, I knew they put a rover down there, but I thought they also did aerial imaging of the moon. No?
Yes, they have done aerial imaging of the moon, and now we're getting into the problems with NASA and all these, where it looks like things have been airbrushed out. I myself have tried to find the original high-resolution photos from NASA of the moon, and they had a site where they had them in high definition. They removed those. We now only have lower medium definition, and you cannot blow those up enough to see. Now, I did manage to find some on another site that were put there before these were removed, and these do show these strange objects on the moon, especially the far side.
Well, and I've talked to Mike Barr in the past about alien bases on the moon. It sounds like you've uncovered similar types of things on the surface.
Very much, and I do base a lot of my research on other people's research as well that I find that's reliable. One can't do it all from scratch, although I do verify and try to find at least 3 sources independent of each other to verify that something is true. I don't go by just what one person says, and I do try to find the original sources. I have applied for freedom of information material. What little I did get was almost entirely redacted. Not much help. So I'm not quite sure if that was of any use at all. But the evidence seems to show that there are ruins on the moon, maybe of mining camps or something else. And some of them look inactive, and there's a couple that look like they might still be active.
And these are on the dark side of the moon?
The far side of the moon.
The far side.
Yes, ma'am, they are.
The side that we can't see. You know, it just might be a whole NASA conspiracy. They don't want the moon to turn so that we can't see the back.
Yes, we might call that another oddity too, but that's probably the result of tidal forces between the Earth and the moon locking towards the Earth. That would be natural. We can account for that. You see, I don't take everything that's an oddity as being a sign of something. I do try to discount it first.
Can you give some examples of what kinds of things, these anomalies that you've seen? on the
Well,
moon?
there's quite a few. There's one that looked like a bridge in an original photo, actually two photos taken by two different astronomers of the moon. It's now disappeared. There was something that looked like a square fortress, and I know this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but we were talking about that impact of a satellite earlier to see what dust would be, what atmosphere, if there might be some water vapor. Granted, there should have been some ice, and they hoped it would go up in the form of water vapor. But it also happened to be the very area where that so-called fortress was, and it's not there anymore. There looks like what was a giant shattered dome. There is an area that they refer to as the LA Basin because it looks like blocks and blocks of buildings like you would have seen if you looked down on the LA Basin, and these run in such straight lines that it's unaccountable. There are grooves in the ground that make right-angle turns. Now, scientists said, oh, this was probably lava flows. Well, lava flows don't make right-angle turns. It flows very much like water. It takes the path of least resistance. But in nature, you rarely see straight lines and right-angle turns. These do this. And how these tracks and grooves were formed, we're not sure. There's also something called the spire, which is something that just towers into the sky and looks like it might be huge. There has been video of what looked like gas venting from the moon from what looks almost like a steeple or chimney at one point. So there's quite a bit on the moon by the looks of it.
What do you think? I mean, we're going to go to break here in a second, but what do you think about the whole notion that we've actually never been to the moon and that the astronaut footage that we do have was filmed by Stanley Kubrick somewhere and fed to the American public?
I think that's ridiculous, personally. But then I thought the hollow moon theory was too at one time. But they broadcast from the moon. The NASA did, and these were on open channels much of the time. And ham operators at the time, in the late '60s and early '70s, were quite capable of picking these signals up, as were other countries like China and Russia. And they could triangulate, and they came from the moon. Plus, they left stuff beat the seismographs and the and other recording devices that we are getting telemetry from. So it would seem and a reflective mirror, and it would seem highly unlikely that that just appeared on the moon by magic. Someone had to put it there.
Well, they could have just sent something up. I mean, I think that, we've sent stuff there, but there's the whole issue with the Van Allen belt, creating a space where, we as organic beings just can't get through it.
Well, the Van Allen belt is a radiation belt, yes, naturally, but they're well shielded, and yes, they do suffer damage. So do the astronauts on board Skylab, or the International Space Station, and there is a problem with that, especially if it's at the time of a solar flare. But we have adequate protection to get people to the moon and back. Massive solar flare occurring sometime during the transition. Astronauts would have been in extreme danger if that had occurred on Apollo missions. They were really very lucky in that regard.
We've been here talking to Rob Shelsky about his book, The Moon is Hollow and Aliens Rule the Sky. His webpage is robshelsky.blogspot.com. Thank you for watching this portion of our interview with Rob Shelsky. If you're enjoying today's program, please click on the button below and subscribe to our channel. If you want to hear this interview in its entirety, please become a Just Energy Radio insider at justenergyradio.com and access full shows commercial-free and gain access to our over 9 years of show archives. Don't forget to share this show with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until next time, I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and remember, it's all just energy.